community only. Alors, l'enregistrement sera seulement pour donner une pérennité à cet échange pour les gens de notre communauté interne. Donc, je vais me permettre de tout de suite présenter les panélistes. On va sauter dans l'échange avec nos panélistes pour aujourd'hui pour cette rencontre sur la réconciliation et la décolonisation. Destiny Grégoire, she, they, is an Indigenous Youth Outreach Coordinator for Tassit Git. Des is a 24-year-old Indigenous woman, artist, and youth program coordinator from the Innu Nation. She uses her creative writing and storytelling to rewrite her own story of resilience and growth as a young Indigenous person and former youth in care. They use their voice and storytelling forms to share their experiences, passions, and voice to bring representation and hope in every space their communities have been left out. Bienvenue, Des. Thank you so much for being here. Can we see if your sound works?
Yeah, is my sound's working? Okay, good, because I'm on my phone.
Excellent. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wayne Robinson. Wayne Robinson is a member of the Ojibwe Nation from the community of Pick River First Nations in Northern Ontario, although he spent most of his life in large urban centers. He has worked within the social services for almost 25 years, specializing working with Indigenous and other racialized people. For the last decade, he has worked with Montreal's urban Indigenous community, both through organizations and community initiatives. He currently works at the Native Friendship Center of Montreal, where he is the lead team leader on the Kawase outreach team. And last but not least, Jennifer Pépin, adjointe à la direction et répondante pour le dossier autochtone. She is a dedicated healthcare professional. She has a bachelor's degree in health science. Jennifer has consistently demonstrated a passion for improving the well-being of individuals and communities, including project management. Currently pursuing her bachelor's in social work, Jennifer was recently appointed as the Indigenous Affairs Officer for the CIUS. In this role, she actively engages with Indigenous community partners, advocates for cultural sensitive healthcare services, and works to bridge healthcare disparities for Indigenous communities. So I want to welcome you, Wayne. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I look forward to this discussion and think we can all hopefully take a bit away from what we're going to share today.
Merci. Bienvenue. Jennifer, bienvenue aussi à cette rencontre.
Oui. Vraiment contente d'être là. Vraiment fière de pouvoir participer à cette discussion.
Donc, pour mettre la table, je veux juste contextualiser nos échanges aujourd'hui. Tout le monde sait que la question de la réconciliation et la décolonisation a pris de l'ampleur dans la dernière décennie. Je voudrais aussi contextualiser certains principes qui sont en lien avec la réconciliation. Il y a eu une commission d'enquête sur les relations entre les Autochtones et certains services publics au Québec. Et donc, la commission vient a été mise sur pied suite aux dénonciations des abus policiers commis à l'endroit des femmes autochtones au Québec et particulièrement originairement dans la région de Val-d'Or. Cette enquête, donc, elle a été l'occasion d'une enquête plus large sur les relations des services publics québécois avec les communautés autochtones. Et l'objectif poursuivi par le gouvernement lors de la mise en place de la commission était d'évaluer la présence de pratiques discriminatoires à l'encontre des Premières Nations et des Inuits, mais aussi et surtout d'établir les bases d'une réconciliation véritable avec les peuples autochtones aux égards de l'offre des services publics. Le 30 septembre 2019, la commission d'enquête rendait public son rapport et ce rapport d'enquête comprend aussi des éléments, donc évidemment des demandes d'action et aussi des mesures de suivi. Voilà. On ne voulait pas prendre trop de place en début de rencontre, mais on trouvait ça important peut-être de parler des 4 principes essentiels à la réconciliation qui sont nommés dans le rapport Vient. Et ces 4 principes-là, on peut les garder en tête dans l'échange qu'on aura aujourd'hui aussi. Donc, 4 principes essentiels à la réconciliation dans le rapport d'enquête. Reconnaître le statut particulier des Premières Nations et des Inuits, donc qui sont porteurs de cultures distinctes et non homogènes entre elles. Ces particularités culturelles posent la question de la différenciation, voire de la pertinence des services publics mis à leur disposition. Deuxième principe important pour la réconciliation, favoriser l'autodétermination. Donc, ce principe repose sur l'idée que les Premières Nations et les Inuits sont les mieux placés pour savoir quels sont les besoins de leur communauté et les solutions les plus appropriées pour y répondre. Troisième principe, agir de manière systémique et concertée. Donc, les travaux de la commission ont permis d'établir le caractère systémique de la discrimination dans les relations entre les peuples autochtones et les services publics. Un problème systémique commande des actions systémiques. Et quatrième principe pour la réconciliation, intervenir en amont. Donc, la complexité des situations mises au jour commande un regard large sur la situation. Il est inutile d'imaginer une mesure précise et d'espérer des résultats concrets si en amont, les causes du problème n'ont pas été prises en compte. Donc, on voulait nommer qui a eu cette commission d'enquête. On va vous rendre à la fin du DND, on va vous partager le lien pour le rapport complet. Donc, si vous voulez aller consulter la section qui concerne la santé et les services sociaux, vous pourrez voir plus précisément les éléments qui ont été soulevés dans ce rapport d'enquête. Également, on vous rendra disponible un résumé qui a été préparé par la santé publique, donc des éléments qui sont en fait des extraits du rapport. On va commencer notre conversation avec les panélistes. We're going to jump right in there. We wanted to address the question of land acknowledgement first and foremost. We know the topic of reconciliation, decolonization is a topic that is gaining traction. We wanted to also address the question that is often brought to our attention, Jennifer and I, regarding is the CIUS having a land acknowledgement? If and when is the organization going to have a land acknowledgement statement? And Jennifer, the panelists, and I have discussed this conversation. We had this conversation before, and we thought it would be interesting and enlightening to share this in this conversation and to start right away with the land acknowledgement question. So when we put them together, initiatives like sécurisation culturelle, cultural safety, we want to be mindful of the purpose of our actions. And especially in the light of reconciliation and a conversation today, the dossier sécurisation culturelle et la question de l'équité et de l'inclusion, c'est une question globale qui nous demande toujours de nous questionner sur pourquoi on fait ces choses. La question de la reconnaissance des territoires soulève cette même question. Pourquoi faire une reconnaissance des territoires? Et pour revenir aux principes qu'on vient de nommer qui sont issus du rapport Vien, il y a des questions d'autodétermination aussi dans la question de reconnaissance du territoire. Alors, comme organisation, on a des questions à se poser à savoir qui souhaite une reconnaissance de territoire, pourquoi on souhaite une reconnaissance de territoire, quel est le purpose de ça, quel sera le outcome, quelle est la finalité de faire ça, si on peut prendre d'autres actions qui seraient peut-être plus significatives, mais qu'est-ce qu'ils en pensent, nos partenaires autochtones, nos employés autochtones, la communauté autochtone que nous desservons. Ce n'est pas des conversations qu'on peut avoir sans eux, puisque c'est les personnes les premières touchées par les reconnaissances de territoire. Il y a différentes questions qui vont s'ajouter à ça, but what would be the purpose of a land acknowledgement is not clear to the same purpose is not clear to everyone. So the work of the cultural safety is just beginning in our CIUS, and Jennifer's going to talk a little bit more about it, and Wayne may as well jump in. But the question of land acknowledgement as to what is it for, what's the purpose, who is it for, who's going to participate in this process of reflection, and what are the outcomes need to be pondered and reflected upon. And so it's not that we're overlooking that, but it needs to be considered in a thoughtful way with the Indigenous communities themselves. Alors, justement, sur cette question-là, I would open the conversation with Wayne, with Des, regarding your thoughts on land acknowledgement. I know in the prep meeting, we had a lot of stuff to share around the land acknowledgement, so I would open it up for you.
Hi, everyone. So maybe I'll jump in here. So as a member of the Indigenous community, being First Nations, you know, I think something that happened over the last decade, especially, was a growth in awareness coinciding with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and other events that brought to light the issues Indigenous folks face here in Canada. And one of the first responses was the land acknowledgement. And at first, me, like a lot of Indigenous folks, were really hopeful that if we had enough community members acknowledge the pains inflicted on Indigenous folks, it would lead to change. A decade later, I'm a bit more pragmatic, and I'll be honest, a bit more disappointed that change has not happened quick enough, to the point where I kind of see a lot of land acknowledgements as being dishonest. I mean, it's kind of hard when you see a decade of people saying, "I acknowledge the pain I caused you and your people. I acknowledge that we're living on stolen land." And the question always comes up, so what? So what are we going to do about it? Just repeatedly acknowledging one's complicity in the pains and land theft without action almost sounds like you're further making fun of Indigenous folks, right? It's actually, it goes from being a safe, culturally secure space to be like, wow, if your organization has been saying for a decade that you're on stolen land, if you and your individuals are saying for a decade that you benefit directly from the pain suffered by Indigenous folks, and you haven't done anything, that's where the challenge is, right? So I would encourage organizations to if they were going to do a land acknowledgement, but to follow that up with an acknowledgement of the work being done to address those historic realms. I don't know if that is something the other panelists agree with, or if there's any
Yeah.
questions or comments from the greater group.
I was gonna follow up on exactly what you were talking about, where like land acknowledgements are kind of just acknowledging like, hey, like we're on this space, but then we don't acknowledge that like it does have like a very like rich history. Like there was like, depending on where you're from, like in Montreal, they did not make any treaties, and so, but also it's like, I don't know, I feel like when we do not land acknowledgements, I feel like it's kind of more very like performative, because it's unless if you're following right up with a statement of solidarity, and you have like very like concrete actions and things that you do for the Indigenous people, like the people that you are on the territory now, then it's kind of, it doesn't really make much difference. But yeah, no, but I guess like acknowledging the land and which territory you're on, like it is important, because like that's like this is the basis of what people should know. But also I think that like with land acknowledgements, if you know the people, if you know which territory you're on and which nations they belong to, then I think it's a good start to actually look into their history and kind of learn like, how did we come from Montreal, and what is the importance of that? Because in summary, like Indigenous people are displaced on their own lands, and so although we're acknowledging through land acknowledgement, we still need to make steps on how to get back to it and help the Indigenous communities.
Yes, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Jennifer, you wanted to jump in?
I did want to jump in and just kind of say, when I became the Indigenous representative, I guess, of this use, like in order to go at various tables and create partnerships with members of the community, initialement, moi aussi, j'étais comme, ah, c'est une bonne idée, tu sais, j'en ai entendu parler, je trouvais ça intéressant parce que ça vient mettre dans le forefront de ta conscience, de, ah oui, c'est vrai, je suis sur du territoire non cédé, ou ah oui, c'est vrai, telle communauté habitait ici ou habite ici présentement. Je trouvais que c'était un pas dans la bonne direction. Cela dit, rapidement, j'ai été confrontée par, un petit peu comme Christine disait, mais pourquoi qu'on fait ça? C'est-tu les communautés qui demandent ça? Qu'est-ce que ça représente? Puis, comme Wayne dit, ben, si on dit ça, mais en disant il n'y a rien qui change, c'était quoi le but de le dire? Fait que, oui, ça peut être une bonne première étape, mais nous, comme organisation, puis on va voir comment ça évolue, ben, on veut se poser la question, ben, réellement, qu'est-ce qu'on peut vraiment faire? And make a sentence like that make sense and be meaningful, I think is more important. So initially I had the same, I think that's my point. Initially I was like, yeah, let's do that. And then I'm like, wait, I was told, wait, let's think about this. And I went, yeah, you know what, that's really good. And I'm happy we're having a conversation about it today.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to the report. Wayne, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in, and I think especially as representatives of the CS, and I think this might have been where you're going, Christine. We did have the Viennes Commission that came out that talked about the inherent um, mistreatment of Indigenous peoples within health and social services, including stuff like the CS. So I think until the actions outlined and recommendations outlined in the Viennes Commission are met, it again might be a bit disingenuous to acknowledge the work that's being done when the work hasn't been done yet, right? To my knowledge, and I think it's pretty safe to say, uh, the recommendations have not been in any way moved forward. So I think it'd be very hard to have a proper land acknowledgement or acknowledgement of the pains caused and inflicted on Indigenous folks if there wasn't but we've also included this very specific Quebec-based inquiry into discrimination and treatment of Indigenous folks within health and social services, right? Like, so I think until that work's done, it's really hard to move forward or to make any sort of acknowledgement that isn't
And this,
furthering the harm.
yeah, and it's exactly where I was going, Wayne, in terms of going back to the principles named by the commissioner. You know, systemic works needs to be done. So we want to avoid tokenism in the work we do. So if we want to do that, let's be mindful of who is it for? Who's going to be more comfortable if there's a land acknowledgement? Who is it going to change the life of? You know, what's this leverage for something else? Because then if we're going to systemic actions, it's a different conversation. And I guess that's a bit of the concerns that we want to make sure that as an organization, what is the most effective way we can bring change in this power dynamic and in the systemic discriminations, you know, as a question we need to ponder on and not just be in a performative mindset. And I'm not saying we are, because I don't think we are, but, you know,
Yeah. And one thing to also just like, it's very quick. One thing important, if you are going to give a land acknowledgement, make sure that you got the right pronunciation. And you don't ask Indigenous people to acknowledge their own land, because it's really weird. I've done that a couple of times. And then until I talked to my buddies who are also Indigenous, and they were saying that like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, I don't know, like they gave me $50 and like I get to like do something important. And they're like, no, you can't acknowledge your own land. They're like, why are they making you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. But yeah, no, but also like I believe like the Mohawk term is a Jojage, and then the nations that we're on is Ganyega land. And yeah. And so yeah, so you gotta learn the language and pronounce it right. And because more people, like Indigenous people, are really getting really want to be identified like very nation specific. So if you can say their community, especially in their Indigenous language, then even better. But yeah, just a quick thought.
Yeah, that is totally relevant. Thank you, Des. So now that we've opened the conversation and we've addressed the question of land acknowledgement, which is usually opening a conversation or a meeting or an event. We discussed about the importance of making sure that we're all starting with the right or a common understanding. So we often overlook the need to make sure that we have that common understanding tied to a specific vocabulary. And so different people have different ways of articulating concept and realities. Could you please, Des and Wayne, share with us your understanding and the meaning you attribute to reconciliation, decolonization? These are two concepts that are alive in September, but also more and more alive all the year round. And so I was, wanting to invite your perspective on those, on this vocabulary or on those concepts that are also in the title of today's event, right?
Des, I'm not sure if you wanted to go first or.
Yes, I think. whichever.
Oh, I think you can. I think you're gonna go first.
Okay, I mean, I can share my thoughts on reconciliation and decolonization. I think first and foremost, it's really important to know that, in my opinion, decolonization does not exist, cannot exist, right? If you look at the actual act of colonization, it's very exploitative from one group to another. So it's like the toothpaste, right? Once it comes out of the tube, there's no way to put it back. In order to address the exploitation of indigenous folks over the last 200 years, and even the last 500 years since contact, the actual necessity. I mean, then you're talking about like a factual land back, right? Like the only way to decolonize is give back lots of land, like Montreal. And to be honest, I just don't believe that would be at this point doable. So I think using that term decolonization is um, it really implies that we're doing work that can't be done. And even sometimes people use the term post-colonial. You're not post-colonial when you still see indigenous folks overrepresented in the prison system, the child protective services. When you still have continued colonial legacy and continued colonial practices that still do harm to this day to the indigenous community. We are definitely not in a post-colonial, and we're not in decolonizing right now. We are still very much amidst the colonization of indigenous folks in Canada. As far as reconciliation, I think this is also something we have to be very clear about what we're reconciling for, right? Like indigenous folks, myself, I'm very proud to come from a beautiful history, a beautiful language, a beautiful spirituality, a beautiful connection to the land. Um, None of these things need to be reconciled for. I think a lot of us come from the same beautiful histories, cultures, language, connections to the land. When we're reconciling in a Canadian context, we're really talking about reconciling for the last 200 years, for the creation of Canada, the embracing of the Indian Act, the development of the residential school systems, the development of the reservation system, the development of the 60 scoop, the dog slaughter. There are many mechanisms that were used to no less than genocide indigenous folks. This is why we reconcile, right? So reconciliation isn't just about, oh, we want to celebrate Native folks. We should celebrate lots of communities, right? Reconciliation is really about, we need to address the benefit every settler has due to the attack in the attempted genocide of indigenous folks, right? So I think again, that terminology, that understanding of what reconciliation is. First, we got to understand why we reconcile. But I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Wayne. You want to leave it there for now, and I'm going to invite Des to join in. So reconciliation, decolonization, Des, what does it mean to you?
Thank you, Wade, for explaining that. Honestly, I still do believe in land back, but not in the sense where like oh, we're gonna take over, like we're gonna like only Indigenous people living on Montreal. It's not like that. But what land back really means is like having kind of like having like actual true sovereignty over over our institutions, being able to take back like our own child care rearing practices, taking back our language, and like revitalizing the relationship with the land, having our traditional responsibilities to the environment, to the communities. But yeah, that's just like one thing. Like I know that land back seems like so like radical and all that, but it really isn't. It's more about just regaining our responsibility and our original stewardship, and what our land means to us. Because um you know how like they say like Indigenous people are never homeless because like the earth is our land. uh I mean, yeah, that's like true, but then you see a lot of overrepresentation of homelessness in like the Indigenous communities. So obviously there's something wrong when there's homeless people, when there's Indigenous homeless people in the cities, and yet they're on their own land. For me, reconciliation and decolonization is very complex because reconciliation is supposed to be describing like establishing and maintaining a peaceful relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, whereas decolonization is the process of freeing an institution, a society, or activities from the effects of colonization. But I feel like right now, like Wayne said, like the colonial systems like have been a basis for a lot of our systems in the healthcare, in the education, with kind of like having a notion that Indigenous people do not really belong there, and that goes back way back then further than like that, and that's like hundreds of years of undoing all that, like all that processes. So I don't really use reconciliation or decolonization, but what I do use is the word called Indigenous resurgence. So Indigenous resurgence to me is it can be a personal but also a community level engagement where it kind of it's about resistance. It's about resistance against the colonialism that lives in the systems, and but also like having the the definition is having the courage to dream a life beyond the state. And so what that means to me personally is being able to live as an Indigenous person without being stereotyped, without having to live in a box, and just being able to be me, to be visible, and to share that with our community. Because yeah, Indigenous resurgence has a lot to do with the disconnection to the lands, the culture, the languages, which create a lot of social suffering because of the treatment, like the mistreatment against Indigenous people. And so like sometimes it's like very visible where like you can see that like people have very strong prejudices against Indigenous people, but then it could be subtle in a more systematic way where it's harder to get these services, get like equitable treatment as other Canadians. But yeah, no, Indigenous resurgence, I use it with my kids all the time. And so I always tell them that, like, listen, like, you're Indigenous, be proud of it, know where you come from, and don't let people let you down. Don't let people say that you can't do this thing because you're Indigenous, because there's not a lot of role models, but do it because you can, and because we're like we deserve to have like a happy ending. We deserve to be able to move up in society. We deserve to have a community that is healthy. And yeah, so that's my opinion.
So thank you for bringing this conversation on Indigenous resurgence. I wonder, and I didn't look at the chat. I wonder if we have in our community people who were familiar with Indigenous resurgence, you know, as a comment dire, comme cadre conceptuel, as a conceptual framework, as a way of looking at your identity, and we were talking about the principles of the Commission Vient a little earlier, you know, la question de l'autonomisation, justement, en lien avec les identités. So I wonder if someone in the community has questions or wants to go a little deeper. I'm just going to open up the floor for this interaction with the participants. And I know that some of the topics we cover at Discuss and Digest, especially around Indigenous communities, may be uncomfortable because we're not sure how to come in the space and ask our questions, but we want to be allowing for this conversation. And so I'm going to just reiterate that you're welcome to communicate with our panelists during this conversation. I don't know, Jennifer, or Des, did you want to add something?
Oh, yeah, I actually wrote a little bit of notes before this thing, and something that I added is like an important part of reconciliation and decolonization is addressing, acknowledging the history and its effect, no matter how uncomfortable it may be, allowing yourself to hear Indigenous people's voices and experiences, but also like being open to like learning, engaging, and just exchanging it.
That's a nice invitation. Thank you. And a nice reminder of the work to be done on our end. So the invitation is there on the table, but I'm going to be pursuing. Jennifer, did you want to add anything to the conversation so far?
Well, we had our pre-meeting before the panel today, and I'm listening to Des speak again about resurgence and being proud of your Indigenous identity and going to get that knowledge and those practices. And it's something that rings true for me, particularly because my family is Mi'kmaq from Newfoundland, but for a long time you couldn't practice, you couldn't speak, you couldn't do any of that. So sometimes, and I'm being very vulnerable by saying this, but sometimes I'll say like colonization worked in our family because we've lost all that. So in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of the members of the community, although there was a band where my mother's from, really went out and did the extra legwork, did the extra effort to go and find, what are our traditions, what are the natural plants and in the area, how do we use them medicinally, how do we trap and hunt, and that's something that happened. So I really like that, Des, about the resurgence and taking pride in. So thank you for that. So I wanted to say that.
I mean, I definitely really relate to your experience of like not knowing the traditions and the cultures because I mean, like I think that like Indigenous people did get disconnected from their cultures and their language and their land, and that happened through residential schools to the 60s scoop, and then even today you see an overrepresentation of Indigenous youth in care. And so my background is I was one of those kids in care who was placed in a non-Indigenous family in Montreal. I was very loved, but I do understand like the pain and like the suffering and the confusion and anger around not understanding like knowing that you're different because like obviously it's like I have darker skin, dark eyes, long black hair, and not understanding like why people are treating me differently, why people why I don't feel like I fit in. And so being able to reconnect with the community, learn more about the culture and how the past has affected today, like was a really big healing part of me. And like something I say to my kids, because I work with teens all the time, is that like you can feel angry, you can feel like allow yourself to feel hurt and like allow yourself to grieve and all that, but like you can't sit in your like in the dark hole. It's like you can use that anger, you can use that that grief to make something that's going to help you and help other people, and they're really doing that, they're really trying. And I'm happy that that we get to do work that like helps the kids kind of understand like hey, this is not your fault that you're placed in care. Like there's a whole bunch of things in the community that like they need to work on, but it's not your fault, but you can help it, you can help yourself by doing good and by doing well, and you have people around you who will help you with that.
And so how do they respond to that conversation, the youths you work with?
The conversations where I'm kind of like telling them that like, oh yeah, like it kind of sucks that like as an Indigenous person, like this is like it's so normal, and like how they respond to that is like they understand, but usually like I don't know, it's a kind of like a realization. They're kind of like, well, I didn't think about it that way. But I feel like when you give them something, like when you give them more context and explain why things are the way they are today, it kind of takes off a lot of that lot of the weight, like thinking that like it's their problem. I'm the only one like with like really severe family issues, and knowing that like they have other people to relate to who are going through the same thing, and having mentors who can like accompany them with that journey, like it helps them so much. Like they feel like, I don't know, I feel like right now I'm creating like a chosen family with my kids, and I let them know that like you guys are my little brothers and sisters, and I'm gonna tease you, and we're gonna argue sometimes, but like this is our family now, and like you're not gonna be alone.
Thank you for that, Des. Wayne, you can jump in. You can leave your mic
Yeah.
open.
No. I mean, I think like thank you, Des. Like that is a lot of really important things to share. And I think one of the things we forget often is um, every Indigenous person um, personally feels the weight of colonization, right? It's a very individualized experience. I grew up with a lot of very internal colonialism. I think me, like a lot of Indigenous folks I know, grew up not wanting to be Indigenous, right? And the pain that caused with, amongst someone's self, right? That internal conflict. It has taken me decades to get to the place where I can honestly say I'm a very and I don't like to use the word proud, but like I am. I'm happy to be an Indigenous person. I'm happy to come from the community that I've come from. I'm happy that we had survived, which is something not a lot of our Indigenous community did not have the privilege of doing. And I think we forget about this individualized aspect to colonization. But a response is never that, right? We never say I owe. Uh, I have a need to reconcile, right? We use we terms. So we as Canada, this institution, um, my parents should reconcile because they're the ones who benefited, and we forget about that I part that comes on the other side. Like, and I think we need to do that, right? Like our land acknowledgements should be personalized. I benefit from Indigenous genocide. Before working with the Indigenous community over the last decade, for a long time I worked with newcomer communities, so recent immigrants and refugees, and would get a very fair question. Wayne, I literally came to this country a week ago. Why do I have to reconcile? And it's a very important question, and I think it's a very fair question, but the answer is also fair. Canada was built on Indigenous genocide. The pains of Indigenous folks are what built this country. So whether you've been here for 1 week or you can trace your lineage back to 500 years ago, right? You are living on a land that was built on pains inflicted on Indigenous communities for the benefit of every Canadian hereafter, right? Or anybody here on this land really needs to maybe reframe. So we actually need to move from this again, this notion of decolonization that I think is hard to achieve, if not impossible. There needs to be like this emphasis on reconciliation. So admitting we did something wrong, and then we really got to move on to reparations, right? And what does that mean? What do we owe in order to have a better, fairer society where Indigenous folks are not overrepresented within the Child Protective Services, where Indigenous folks are not overrepresented in the criminal justice system, where Indigenous folks feel safe to come and access services at a CS, right? Like these are the real life ramifications of a system that is doing a lot of harm. And I saw a hand go up. I'll try not to monopolize all the conversation, but I can if you want. So.
But thank you. Thank you for your critical perspective. And I think, this is bringing points of tension, right, in the conversation. And I appreciate that because it's important.
I mean, people should be uneasy. I promise you, every Indigenous person is very uneasy with what's happened to us.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't apologize anymore for creating uneasiness around people where I have these conversations with. Yeah.
And it's something to just know that it brings points of tension, and it can bring up in non-Indigenous, it can bring up powerlessness and some feelings of guilt, shame, but then what, right? We're going to come back to that conversation. And I also saw the hand up. Colette Béchard, you want to jump in the conversation?
Yes, please, I'd like to jump in the conversation.
En français, en anglais, comme vous voulez. Hein?
I'll speak in both languages in the same sentence as I always do. Merci, Des and Wayne, for your comments. Honestly, I just, at the beginning, I heard what you said, and I was, wow, I said, okay, so they're talking about resurgence, they're revivre, and that is quite, comment je pourrais dire ça, constructif. But in a sense, I personally feel ashamed for whatever my ancestor did 400 years ago. I mean, I'm from the 1500 here, from my family. And what I'm thinking is, and I wrote in the chat at the beginning, is reconnaissance is still some way of réparation. And I'm still ashamed of all the conditions that we don't necessarily talk about so much. You know, like I don't know if it's fixed, but you know, like housing and water in the north of Quebec. I mean, it's probably still the same issues, and I barely feel that it's hard to je sais pas comment dire ça, to constater, to observe that those issues are still there, and we're in the, you know, like 2023. And to me, when we talk about réparation, I mean, résurgence is one thing when you don't necessarily décolonize. J'ai aimé l'idée du toothpaste. Let's say tu peux pas décoloniser. That's one thing, but recognize and do something, and repair in some way that at least to give proper condition. And it goes along with recognizing, being proud of it, maybe renaming whatever street or buildings or land. That's one thing of recognition, but you cannot just do that. You need at least to also repair and fix things that are not, well, that are not okay in a human being condition. Je sais pas si je me suis bien exprimée en anglais, mais en tout cas, c'est très émotif pour moi, ce sujet-là. Puis je trouve que c'est comme si c'était jamais assez. Il y a eu énormément de conscientisation. En plus que je viens de la région de Joliette, là, puis on ne parlera pas de ce qui s'est passé à Joliette, mais c'est ça. Il y a tous ces éléments-là qui ont amené une conscientisation dans les dernières années. But other than that, I encourage you to, you know, like to speak more and to be, je sais pas. Puis en même temps, to speak more, we need to be listened to. C'est ça, je veux dire. But in our own, je suis pas le gouvernement, je suis pas dans le systémique, but I'm one individual in the CIUS, and I could just wonder, in like, why we don't do a little thing, you know, like in, si je l'ai dit au début, là, mais probablement que le CIUS est sur une terre non cédée. Should we, and if we do such thing, would it be well received to you, or it doesn't, you know, like sometimes we may think that we will do something that will be appreciative, but maybe it's not the right thing to do. So honestly, you're the ones to tell. Thank you.
Merci, Colette. Je vais inviter Des et Wayne à prendre la parole s'ils le souhaitent, et Jennifer également, mais je pense que cette intervention, ça met en lumière exactement ce que j'allais écrire dans le chat. Comment et selon qui et selon quelle perspective est-ce que un geste de réparation est souhaité ou est utile, ou un impact significatif and sustainable impact? You know, we want to do gestures that do have a significant impact, but from whose perspective, right? Is that meaningful? So Wayne, Des? Jennifer?
I've always been open to taking gifts. So if anybody wants to personally have their reconciliation debt wiped, I can give you my Vimo, or I'll take any vacation property. I'm very open to that. But you know, I joke, but like I think we have to look at what do we do that affects the lives of individuals, right? You know, I saw a message in the chat about fancy words. Fancy words are just that, right? They don't mean anything, and I think this is the pain land acknowledgements I felt have been caused on the Indigenous community. 10 years of fancy words with very little action. You know, the last person that interjected talked about the housing and fresh potable water crisis happening across Canada, Indigenous communities. These things are literally unacceptable. You know, we need to do better. Individuals need to take that onus upon themselves to not ask, but demand for that change. It simply can't just be on the poor Indigenous folks who already give so much. Our literal lived experience is we are surviving a genocide for the benefit of survivors, and the intergenerational legacy of colonialism still affects almost every daily function of Indigenous folks. And let's also be very clear, we are not talking about events that happened 400 years ago. We're talking about the ongoing events that are happening to this day. Um, it is really important that we drop that language right away. Like, this isn't something that happened many generations ago. It is something we are experiencing this day. It's something we will experience tomorrow. It's something we will experience for the foreseeable future until individuals all step up, own the privilege that was created from the harms done to Indigenous people, and make their own plan on how they're going to address it. I suggest giving Wayne vacation property, but not everybody has some. So, I mean, find your own way.
And on that, I was gonna bring so I think it's a good moment to bring this because individual response to collective je vais dire un peu en français, mais il y a des enjeux qui sont dans la condition vient, des principes qui ont été énumérés, dont étant les aspects systémiques et les transformations systémiques, puisqu'il y a eu discrimination systémique. Et si on veut collectiviser et avoir un impact, comment les organisations s'engagent là-dedans? And I was going to bring a little bit the conversation on the work that when you're part of this budding work that we're doing in this years, and Jennifer, maybe I'd like to invite you to talk about this budding work et le travail en émergence que Jennifer mène avec les partenaires autochtones et une bonne partie de notre organisation. Jennifer, si tu veux nous mettre un peu au parfum, parce qu'un des enjeux, c'est si les organisations ont participé to the wrongdoings. So how can they be also part of the repair? So, Jennifer, je ne sais pas si tu veux parce qu'il y a des gens de notre organisation qui ne savent peut-être pas ce qui est fait en ce moment ou ce qui est en émergence de ton côté au niveau du dossier de la sécurisation culturelle.
Merci beaucoup, Christine. Puis, je vais juste en écoutant Wayne, puis Wayne, je suis toujours très ouverte et j'aime ça quand tu nous parles des aussi. C'est vraiment riche que vous soyez là pour nous partager vos vues de la colonisation, puis les torts qui ont été causés. Puis je pense que c'est important aussi comme on le disait, de vivre avec son inconfort, mais je pense qu'il y a quelque chose de très powerful dans le sens où on a chacun un rôle qu'on peut jouer. On est chacun des représentants de l'établissement dans lequel on travaille, puis on peut faire quelque chose. Puis je sais que des fois, on a l'impression, même moi, ça fait presque 1 an que je suis dans le dossier, puis des fois, je me sens un petit peu comme overwhelmed par la grandeur de la problématique, comment les tentacules systémiques sont vraiment partout, puis moi, je suis comme, qu'est-ce que je peux faire dans mon CIUS pour aider? Fait que c'est de ça que je veux parler, mais je veux juste commencer en expliquant, c'est quand on parle de sécurisation culturelle, puis c'est récemment, j'ai été confrontée à cette question-là, mais c'est quoi ça? C'est quoi ça, se sentir safe culturally quand tu t'en vas chercher des soins? Puis je vais le définir de façon très brève en disant, c'est que toi, comme personne autochtone, si tu conçois aller chez le médecin, tu conçois aller dans un CLSC, aller chercher un service, tu te sens-tu à l'aise de le faire? Est-ce que tu penses que ton a priori va être, je vais être respecté, on va respecter peut-être mes connaissances ancestrales, ma médecine ancestrale, on va-tu respecter le fait que je sois autochtone puis qu'on ne va pas avoir des préjugés à mon égard avant même de me présenter en rentrant dans les portes? Est-ce que je me sens en sécurité? Je sens-tu qu'on va bien s'occuper de moi, qu'on va bien me prendre en considération, puis que les prestataires de santé sont vraiment à l'écoute de mes besoins, me respectent? En gros, c'est ça. Puis c'est un peu difficile de dire comment je peux savoir que mon usager, la personne que j'aide, se sent comme ça. Mais c'est sûr que le plus qu'on travaille pour sensibiliser les intervenants, sensibiliser le personnel à c'est quoi les enjeux autochtones, c'est quoi la sécurisation, c'est quoi les bonnes pratiques, puis ce qu'on essaye de faire. Puis là, j'arrive à ça. c'est justement sensibiliser, former, avoir ces conversations comme on les a aujourd'hui. Puis je suis vraiment très reconnaissante de travailler avec Christine là-dessus, qui a tout le volet diversité, équité, inclusion et appartenance du CIUS. Mais au-delà de ça, comment qu'on fait avec nos partenaires communautaires? Fait que le gros du travail qu'on fait actuellement, c'est de s'asseoir, rencontrer nos partenaires. Tout ça est sorti d'un projet en santé publique où justement on s'est dit, pour mieux travailler avec les organisations communautaires autochtones, il faut les connaître. On a réalisé comme si on ne les connaît pas forcément. Fait qu'on a repris la balle au bon que la santé publique a parti et on s'est dit comment qu'on fait pour co-construire avec. Fait que quand on parle de co-construction, c'est de voir comment qu'on établit une gouvernance conjointe avec nos partenaires. Comment qu'on peut leur parler au lieu d'arriver comme CIUS, qui peut être souvent le cas, puis de dire on va faire tel projet, puis on cherche des collaborateurs, mais c'est plus avec nos collaborateurs, quels projets permettront de donner de meilleurs soins et des services à notre population qui sont pertinents, qui font sens, et de le co-construire avec eux. Fait que je ne cache pas que moi aussi, que je suis en apprentissage continuel, des façons de faire, de la délicatesse à avoir dans certaines situations. Je suis très sensible à ça, puis très humble aussi à dire je ne sais pas tout, puis on essaie de faire avancer ça, mais ensemble comme CIUS, avec les gens du comité à l'interne, d'apprendre de connaître plus sur les défis auxquels on fait face, comment qu'on fait pour faire mieux. Il y a tellement de ressources qui existent pour nous aider à faire ça. Fait que, on a aussi, je le mentionne, une agente de liaison autochtone, Lucie-Maude Grégoire, qui a commencé avec nous cet été, que c'est un peu son rôle aussi de mettre en lumière ces choses-là. Puis vous allez entendre parler d'elle de plus en plus et de nous et de notre initiative. Mais là, au moment où on se parle, avec les 5 minutes qui restent, on est vraiment dans la construction de nos liens avec nos partenaires et aussi de la co-construction de projets potentiels. On est là vraiment à réfléchir avec nos partenaires pour voir qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire qui fait sens, puis de commencer à quelque part. C'est ça que j'essaie de dire. On commence à quelque part, but I will say for me personally, Jennifer, it's intimidating. It's intimidating to go, wow, it's a lot to deconstruct. It's a lot to take stock of. And to also, have people that work in our CIUS not be too demobilized by the heaviness of the history and the suffering, and to go, but we are all actors of change. We can all do something, whether you're a secretary, whether you're a manager, whether you're a social worker or a nurse or a doctor in our CIUS, we can all do something and educate ourselves. So I will end on that note.
Merci. Merci pour cette mise en contexte, Jennifer, du travail qui est en amorce, puis aussi de tes perspectives sur ce travail-là. Je pense que ça soulève aussi, quand tu dis on a tous le pouvoir de faire quelque chose, la question de nos déconstructions intérieures, de nos propres biais. On parlait tout à l'heure avec Des de stéréotypes. She was mentioning stereotypes. And so what are the biases we're harboring, each and one of us, regarding Indigenous communities? I mean, if there's work that needs to be done, yes, systemic work is important. What can we do on an individual level? How can we be part of our own reappropriation of our own ways of seeing the world? And it's power dynamics and power structures as well. And we didn't really talk on that in an explicit manner, but the way, co-construction happens is a recalibrating of the power differences. And I think that could be an entire conversation in itself, because, the question of autonomy is tied to power. And what does that mean socially, economically, environmentally, So, Des, you were mentioning land. J'ai pas le terme exact. Land, I'm sorry, I just slipped my mind. But, comment on s'occupe de ce rééquilibre de pouvoir?
Land back, I think that's what she's trying to say. Land back.
So, I know we don't have much time, and I want to acknowledge conversations in the chat if there are some. In the 2 minutes that is left, we will be giving you access to resources, and I want to give a last prise de parole for our panelists. Wayne, I see you have your finger up.
I'll be very quick. I think there were very immediately two great activities happening. One this Saturday, I believe at 1 p.m. We will be discussing the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, also known as Orange T-shirt Day, to remember the effect of residential schools, of which I'm a survivor, on Indigenous communities. Also something a bit funner. I realized one of my favorite playwrights is having a play in Montreal, and it's actually closing on the 30th. It's called As You Like It, a radical retelling of William Shakespeare's work by artist named Cliff Cardinal. I suggest in the greatest way that if you can attend this play, it is so important. But thank you all for having me. Again, I'll put up my email address for anybody else wants to send me any vacation property or personal. I'm joking. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for this rich conversation. Des, I would like to give you the mic.
Oh, okay. I mean, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me, and I am always open to coming back and doing more like discussions and like workshops and all that. I love like sharing my own story and like giving a voice to Indigenous communities. I mean, one last thing I want to leave people with is so like one thing that you can do right now that's going to help Indigenous people is changing your perception of like how we talk about Indigenous people as like the suffering, as the victims, and reframing that into like a people that survived genocide, that survived ongoing colonization, that survived oppression, and who have now who have fought against that and now our kids are revitalizing, reclaiming land, languages, and that we're stronger and we're still here. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you
for this invitation. Des, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us the perspectives and also offering, because we didn't get to the artistic practice, but that would be topic for a different discussion. Thank you so much. Jennifer, un dernier mot. Merci d'avoir été avec nous. Je te laisse dire quelque chose, une invitation peut-être.
Moi, je suis toujours ouverte s'il y a des gens du CIUS qui veulent nous contacter pour discuter d'enjeux ou discuter d'idées potentielles ou autres. C'est sûr qu'à un moment donné, on va vouloir mettre sur pied des projets concrets, fait qu'on veut toujours des alliés pour ça. Moi, je vais juste terminer en disant, encore une fois, comment je suis reconnaissante que ce dossier m'est tombé in my lap, and also the partnerships that I'm starting to create with different partners and learning about different ways from different communities. So it's also very fun in Montreal. We're very diverse. We're very multicultural in Montreal, but there's also many representations of different communities that you get to know about, and I'm very very grateful for that. So I just want to say thanks everyone for being here and listening as well. Thanks, Christine, for the great organization, Christina as well.
Alors, on va remercier tout le monde. Il reste 27 participants qui sont toujours avec nous à 1h02. Merci infiniment. Thanks, everyone, for being part of this conversation and for being here on the learning journey with us. See you next time.
Bonne journée. Voilà.
Christina, can you stop the recording, please?
All right. Bye. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Des. We'll circle back